History is not only about kings, conquests, and treaties. Sometimes its darkest pages are the ones that record how entire societies decided to punish women simply for speaking too loudly, loving the wrong person, healing with herbs, dancing at the wrong time, or existing when fear needed a scapegoat. For centuries, the female body itself became the public stage on which religion, law, and raw power performed their most horrifying spectacles, each punishment carefully designed not just to kill or hurt, but to send an unmistakable message to every other woman watching. Step out of line, and this will happen to you. Imagine the market square in Rouen in 1431, a 19-year-old girl named Joan of Arc, already betrayed by her king and convicted of heresy, led barefoot to a stake, while the crowd that paid for seats roars with excitement. They shaved her head, smeared her sackcloth gown with sulfur so the flames would catch faster, chained her high above mountains of wood, and as the fire rose she called for a crucifix to be held up so she could see Jesus through the smoke, repeating his name until the flames stole her voice. She was only one of tens of thousands, mostly women, burned alive across Europe between the 15th and 18th centuries, accused of witchcraft when crops failed, plague struck, or neighbors needed someone to blame, because the witch hunter's manual Malleus Maleficarum had already explained that women were carnal, weak in faith, and slippery-tongued, perfect vessels for the devil. In quieter towns, centuries later, a wife who argued too much with her husband could be locked into an iron scold's bridle, a cage around the head with a spiked gag driven into the tongue, so every word drew blood, bells, or donkey ears bolted on top, so the whole village would laugh as she was paraded like a monster for the crime of having an unruly tongue. By the riverbank, another woman, labeled a nag or a gossip, was strapped to the end of a long beam called the ducking stool and plunged again and again into freezing, filthy water until she nearly drowned while neighbors pelted her with rubbish. Float calmly and you proved you were a witch. Drown and at least you died innocent. In darker chambers, the torture grew intimate and obscene. The breast ripper, 4 iron claws sometimes heated red-hot, clamped onto a woman's breast and torn slowly away because she was accused of adultery, abortion, or blasphemy. The Spanish donkey, a sharp wooden wedge on which a naked woman was forced to straddle, while stones tied to her ankles dragged her body weight down, splitting flesh and bone over hours or days. The Pear of Anguish, a metal pear inserted into mouth, vagina, or anus, then slowly expanded by turning a screw until it tore the body apart from the inside. The iron chair studded with hundreds of spikes on seat, back, and armrests where women were stripped, strapped, and pressed deeper as the straps were tightened, sometimes with fires lit beneath to sear the wounds. These were not punishments for murder or theft. Most of these women had committed no crime at all, except being loud, sexual, intelligent, poor, old, young, foreign, or simply alive when the village needed a sacrifice. Some of these tortures were still legal in parts of Europe and colonial America when Mozart was composing symphonies and the Enlightenment was supposedly dawning. Look closely and the same pattern screams across centuries. Whenever society grows terrified of plague, famine, heresy, change, or losing control, it very often turns that terror against women's bodies with a creativity and cruelty that is almost impossible to comprehend today. The smell of wood smoke and burning flesh, the clang of iron masks, the splash of the ducking stool, the screams echoing from dungeon walls. These were the sounds of justice in places that proudly called themselves civilized. So when we ask ourselves how far we have truly come, we have to stare straight at these stories, at Joan praying through the flames, at the 12-year-old girl in Bavaria burned for making hailstorms, at every nameless woman whose tongue was pierced for speaking, whose breasts were torn for loving, whose body was split open for dancing. And we have to admit that the impulse to control half of humanity by making examples of their pain has never fully disappeared. It only changes shape. That is why we must never stop telling these stories, because the past is still speaking, and only by listening can we make sure it never speaks like this again.